Great.
And why don't I mute everybody while we're at it? And then Peter, you may want to unmute yourself.
Yeah. All right. So Heather, please.
I just want to say welcome to everybody to our State Street Forum. Uh, my name is Heather Kirk Davidoff. I'm the minister of the Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Albany, New York, and here with the Reverend Peter Cook, who's the executive director of the New York State Council of Churches. And the State Street Forum is also co-sponsored by the Focus Churches of Albany. Fred Bohr is the executive director of Focus, and I can see that there's quite a few Focus Church members here, including some folks from Westminster, First Presbyterian, Emmanuel Baptist. I think if I've gotten the full census of Focus. And welcome to all the rest of you. It's wonderful to have such a good group to come and talk about these important issues around the church and how communities of faith, churches, congregations of all sorts can be part of the solution and not just contributors to the problem having to do with carbon emissions that lead to climate change here in the state of New York and around our country. The invitation still stands as you join us to take a moment and write in the chat a word of introduction and any specific questions or concerns, what brought you here today, if there are particular things that we can address during the course of this short hour, we certainly would like to. But we're going to just begin by, let me just explain a little bit about our conversation today, which is organized in 3 parts. And that means each one of these parts, which could be a full hour-long conversation, is going to take place in about 10 to 15 minutes. So this is going to be a very quick overview of the whole topic, and hopefully some suggestions about how you can take it to the next level and go a little deeper. We're going to begin by talking about the issue of how to convert buildings, houses of worship to clean and solar energy. And our guest today on that topic is Rob Crowderuff, and I think Peter is going to do some more introductions.
Great. So we're so pleased to introduce Rob Crowderuff, who his firm is partnering with New York State Council of Churches with a grant from NYSERDA to do 3 things. One is to consult with congregations about their energy use. Number 2, to set up social justice committees in congregations, particularly with an attention to energy use and climate justice and affordable housing justice in our communities. And number 3, to sell solar subscriptions to low and moderate income homeowners and renters, but not limited to that. So Rob runs a firm called Crowderuff and Associates. He is a graduate of Columbia University and also received a master's in urban planning from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. So it's a great partnership between the Council of Churches and Rob. And Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you to address the first section.
Thank you, Peter. It's wonderful to be here. I'm really excited to see the comments of what brings so many of the participants to the table. There's a lot of exciting topics to cover. So the first topic that I'd like to cover is around how to help houses of worship green their buildings through clean energy and solar. To step back for a moment and consider some statewide context, you may be familiar with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that passed the state in 2019 that requires that 40% of a 40% emission reduction at the state level by 2030 from 1990 levels, and an 85% emission reduction of climate change emissions by 2050. So the state is very aggressively seeking renewable energy and electrification. Solar specifically as a subset of this. The state just in April formally announced a goal to increase the solar pipeline across the state from 6 gigawatts to 10 gigawatts. To put that into normal terms, a gigawatt can generate enough solar for about 100,000 homes. There is a strong social equity component to all of this. Part of the Climate Leadership Community Protection Act, or CLCPA, has a mandate that 35% of the benefits arrive or go to disadvantaged communities, and a goal that 40% do. So that's a significant share and a much larger share than normally takes place. So there's some substantial funding available. And to take a step back, what does that mean, again, in tangible terms? Just looking at solar, of that 6 gigawatt, of that 4 gigawatt increase from 6 to 10, then that means about 160,000 to 200,000 homes from low-income households would need to receive benefits from solar. And so that's a substantial effort over the course of several years. And there are different ways to accomplish that. And houses of worship can play an important role in that as well. Houses of worship that are in disadvantaged communities can also gain credit toward those objectives. So and the state has put an initial about $51 million toward this over the course of the summer. They just put actually several hundred million additional just in the last month or two. So there's some huge investments and an opportunity to leverage those. So to get tangible, what does this mean potentially for houses of worship? Well, there are two basic ways, and I'll start with solar, then I'll touch on electrification at the end of this initial conversation. First, at the building scale itself, then either solar panels can go on a house of worship or other property that you may own. The most typical arrangement then is that you'll get your energy costs will be reduced each month based on the electricity generated by those solar panels. That is probably what folks are most familiar with. Community solar subscriptions have been advancing rapidly across the state. So the second opportunity that is quite accessible is that it is possible for a house of worship to sign up to a solar farm that is off site. So there's no construction to manage, there's no upfront cost. The terms of these tend to be pretty advantageous. Essentially, your property can sign up and get an allocation, say 1% of a large solar farm somewhere else, perhaps in your county or somewhere else in the state, and you get guaranteed 10% savings off of the value of the electricity generated by that farm. So it's a very easy way to be able to save money without having any upfront investment that you would incur. So that is how we're working and providing technical assistance is looking at really both different options. The first option, we want to understand your property, your facility. Of course, we'll take a look at the utility that you're located in, because in Con Ed, And Long Island electricity is a lot more expensive than it is in other parts of the state. So we'll say, well, what essentially do an opportunity assessment. Do you want to consider solar on your roof? Does that make sense economically at all? If so, what are the financing options? Do you need to come out of pocket? There are other what are called third-party providers that can come in and finance the system for you. They'll own and operate the system on your roof, and you'll wind up getting a saving on your bills. That is feasible in some circumstances. In others, then really accessing a solar farm can make more sense. And we have a network of solar providers upstate and essentially serve as an intermediary to help you find a solar farm that is in your utility that you qualify for, that's either currently online or about to go online, that's a good fit for you. So we'll really help to facilitate that process. So when we're looking at solar for your property, again, those are the two main approaches, either on your roof or a subscription to an offsite project. Another opportunity to consider is around energy efficiency. Of course, there's a lot of concern around the climate change impacts of natural gas, which is typically used for heating buildings in particular. And in New York City, there's some additional important regulatory context. Local Law 97 that also passed in 2019, same year as the CLCPA, so a big year for climate change policy. Local Law 97 requires buildings 25,000 square feet and over to meet certain climate emission goals or cap. And if a property goes over that, then there are some stiff penalties. There are particular carve outs for houses of worship, so we need to understand the particular sort of zoning and rules around your building. But there's some really great technical assistance available in New York City that we work side by side with. There's what's called the New York City Accelerator, which we work with, help to identify an auditing firm. And we really want to work with you to help to understand what are the energy efficiency improvements that you can make. What are the improvements that will also have a substantial climate impact? For example, making going from one gas boiler to a more efficient one isn't ideal, but perhaps that's all you can afford. But if there's the opportunity to go electric, that can be even better. So once that audit is conducted, then we have various sources of financing that are really set up for community organizations, nonprofits, houses of worship that can come in and help to pay for the system if you're not able to as a congregation, come out of pocket and pay for those improvements. So that's another area. We really are being as holistic as possible to be able to look at your building and help you get off of dirty fuels as much as possible, save money as much as possible, and to make the process as seamless as possible. So at that, I'll back to Peter.
Great. So thank you, Rob. What I want to emphasize here is what Rob and the council do is that we offer free consultation to meet with your religious leader and your board of trustees and social justice committees. Usually it's good to do those together, where we make sure that there's a good audit of what's going on with your building. And then we provide some guidance as to your options. Some of that has to do with solar. Some of it might have to do with heat pumps. Some of it might have to do with, I don't know, lighting and, whatever it is. And then to help introduce you to contractors and financing that can help you go where you want to go. So that's a service that we are really happy to provide no matter where you are in the state. So at this point, I'd like to ask if there are questions. I saw a few related to this particular topic about congregation buildings in the chat. But why doesn't, for those of you who asked those questions, why don't you go ahead?
If you just would raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, since
Yeah,
can't see everybody on our screen, that will be helpful. But I did see that John Flack asked a question, I think specifically related to going to community solar, if there was a link available for that. I know a number of us have done that already, and my recollection is that there was information provided right on your electrical bill about how to do that. But Rob, do you have anything else you'd want to say about that?
Yeah, no, well, we can work with you directly to work with a solar farm and then provide a subscription to you, essentially. So we can follow up afterwards, get your bill information, and have, depending on what utility you're in, we have different providers that we'll set you up with.
So what would somebody do? Do you want to have people send an email to Council of Churches
That would be great. Yeah.
around this? Okay.
exactly.
So
And let
all
me
that-
just say, just to build on that, many of you probably get these mailings, to sign up for solar, and it can get a little confusing. So if you call us, we can help you sort that out a little bit and figure out how to get signed up in a way that makes sense for you with a reputable vendor.
Awesome. Are there other questions at this point specifically about going to clean energy or electrification as a house of worship? I saw some people, somebody indicated that they had trouble doing this. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Karen?
Unmuting. My question was, we had our parish had an audit 2 years ago by the firm that was working for Interfaith Power and Light in New
Yeah.
York. And their auditor looked at what we had done because we were interested in maybe getting solar panels on our roof. We've got a big open space, good, southern exposure, everything. And that auditor said, well, I see that you've made these improvements, you've replaced that boiler, you've got minimal, your bills are really low. Since there would be nothing for a supplier to make on this, because you're not saving enough money for our installer to be paid to do this work.
Okay.
What's the answer to that? How are there other ways that we could get help that would motivate the parish to install solar?
Right.
Okay.
That's an interesting scenario. So what I'm guessing his analysis was essentially is that, let's say the solar system could generate $20,000 worth of energy, but your house of worship is only using 5. Then there's a gap, right? Mm-hmm. There are different ways to set up a project that would allow for that system to still work, right? Essentially what you can do is, we can work with you to help set an arrangement like this up, is to find other subscribers or other property owners that can purchase the power from you, and that would be able to essentially amass a full project, right? So either you can have a smaller system built, or we can look at some other folks that could participate in a project, and we'd really need to get into the specifics, and we're happy to set up a consultation with you to see, well, how much solar can you generate? How many other folks might need to participate in a solar project or program for you to be able to build a larger system. Mm-hmm. If that is in fact the issue that he was raising as a challenge.
Yeah. In that regard, we're in a town that's recently started a climate smart task force. They're looking for the town to do more with renewable energy. Are you aware of any situations where, the municipality could partner with a house of worship or include them in a way that, sort of helps meet the town's own goal through the, for them to get benefits from NYSERDA?
Right. Well, two approaches I described are really the main approaches, right? So if there's a local solar farm, they may want to have local procurement of that solar farm. Otherwise, really wanting to see solar built across the town. So I think we need to learn more about the town and what they're doing. More largely, though, it sounds like what you would be doing would certainly be advancing what they're needing to achieve.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but it's only going to happen if it's, cost free.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And lastly, to end that thought, but I think it is applicable to others, and there are some cost-free options out there that we can
Okay, thank you.
I just see John Flack has his hand up, and then let's move on to the next topic.
Yeah, thanks. And of course, you can just cut me off if you need to move on. So I'm not shy
Well,
about
go right
that.
ahead. Go right ahead.
We had to turn off. We had a gas leak in our church, and so we're using this as an opportunity to cut the natural gas line and install electrical appliances. But it's kind of a lot more expensive than we originally thought it would be, just because of dealing with like DOB and all this other stuff. And we've had a lot of trouble, like just understanding rebates, getting through NYSERDA. We're working with a team called Block Power, which is going to help us with that. But I'm wondering, like, if there's any way that folks can like just finding information. I feel like I'm a 21st century person. I'm almost an internet native, and I have such a hard time navigating NYSERDA. It's kind of unbelievable. I'm just wondering if anybody has any kind of if you guys do help with that.
Yeah, and where are you in the state?
I am in Manhattan.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, really, I think it's important to, it depends on the project. The efficiency, the provider that you're working with really should take frankly, they should take responsibility over those, permits and jurisdictional and incentive issues. So I think that's really where, so from, it may take some time, but really any additional cost or incentives like that really needs to be on the provider. So at a high level, that's my initial response. We can talk offline more about your particular situation and if there's ways we might be able to help.
Yeah, John, just to build on what Rob said, again, what we try to do is every church's situation is a little different, and we kind of function like an owner's rep to help you sort out the confusing website on NYSERDA and what these programs are, and try to put it in English so that you can figure out how to move forward. So this was a general response, but we should set up an appointment and sit down and talk with you specifically.
But it is helpful to know, Peter, that John's not alone. I'm not alone in finding it hard to navigate these things independently. I did also see a question from Kevin Conley. Thanks for highlighting this. Just is there actually funding to assist houses of worship with this conversion over to renewable energy? Are there any sources of funding support for that?
The short answer is yes. It depends on what technologies are being installed and where you are in the state as to the incentives. So this speaks to what John was referring to, that there's sort of a myriad of different incentives and approaches, and different ways that providers will take responsibility, or there are third parties that might pay for everything. Again, if you have a project that there could be some good economic returns, but you just can't come out of pocket for it, there are other providers that can do that for you. But maybe, frankly, and this is the owner's rep side that Peter was referring to, maybe you really should find a way to pay for it yourself if it's a shorter term payback, even if someone else can come in and do it for you. So understanding those options is something that we really want you to fully understand at this stage. So yes, there are a lot of different ways to pay for this and different approaches, and we want to help you make sense of it so that you can make the best decision to move forward as possible.
Right.
The next section of, and this is very closely linked to this first specific nuts and bolts kind of work that the council has partnered with Rob to do, has to do with advocacy around climate justice and also affordable housing. And as we head into that, oh, there you go, Peter. As we head into that section of the conversation, I want to just ask for a little poll of the group here. And if you would, I hope everybody knows how to raise their hand either on the screen like this or, using the function on Zoom that looks something like that or whatever. Just to respond to the question, if you're involved with a congregation, does your congregation have a social justice committee or a climate justice committee or a eco justice or green team or something like that? Is there a specific committee in your church that is related to social or climate justice? Great. Oh, this is terrific. It looks like quite a few of us do. Okay. And with that, let me hand it back over to Peter, who's going to say a few words about working with a social justice or a climate justice team to do this kind of advocacy work.
Right. Okay, so this is the second part of this presentation where we want to talk about setting up social justice committees or enhancing them in general and sort of what we've learned about how to do that. And I'm just going to take you through a few points. And then after this, we'll go to the specifics around solar subscriptions and homeowners and renters, but let's focus on this second one next. So what we try to say is that social justice committees are there to help the congregation and members of your neighborhood and region to do justice locally, statewide, and nationally. And that membership could be as few as 3 people or as many as 12 or even more. And we want to encourage you to add to that committee non-members, activists, and others, and not restrict it just to the members of your congregation. There are a few assumptions that we'd like to share with you about setting up committees like this. And the first is, remember that it's not there to do all the work, but enabling others in the congregation to do the work and for Christians to live into their baptisms or, whatever, formulation you have to help people live into, live out their faith. It's not there to do everything for the congregation. Your pastor, your rabbi, your imam is not there to do social justice on your behalf, but to equip the congregation to do that work and together. So it's sort of both and. Some want to set up a committee you could suggest that this be a subcommittee of pastoral care or trustees or the governing body. Some congregations choose to do it that way and not have a separate committee per se. But, whatever you decide, it's important that the committee work in tandem with others. We really like to say that worship's a good place to do social justice work, preaching, music, continual, examination of how you include and welcome people. Stewardship moments, this kind of thing. We encourage you to, in all your work, to examine both interpersonal and structural racism and know the difference between those, and to help congregations make that connection between the two. And, this is an ongoing activity which should affect everything you do. And we encourage you to create spaces in your meetings and community gatherings for anti-racist and theological reflection. And another is to work with your community with an ecumenical and interfaith mindset, and include and embrace people of no faith and support their leadership. Social justice is not a branding opportunity for your congregation or denomination. It's something where you are about building relationships with others. Charities, also an important work for these committees, but please remember that it's no substitute for helping congregants to do justice in the community. It's a both and proposition. Charity sometimes is a good way to build relationships, but it's no substitute for doing the structural kind of work. And finally, two more things: harnessing the organizing capacity and staffing of other groups, religious and secular, New York State Council of Churches, and so on. No need to duplicate staffing and resources if there are others who can help do that for you or with you. And finally, we just encourage people to not bite on that parishioner who says, well, we have to attend to our own local needs first before we can get to national, state, or global justice work. We say that's a false trade-off, and it all interconnects. So what does a committee do? What are some activities? Well, probably one of the first things it should do is sponsor and organize one-on-one conversations in their congregation and with members of the community. So really building that into your practice, setting up vehicles for people to talk to one another, to listen, to meet people, learn about what your parishioners are already engaged in the community and how the congregation can support their work already. So it's really, you're in the business of showing up, serving, participating, and getting out of your comfort zone. And again, getting your congregants to do this, not just the committee. Second, to collaborate with those entrusted with the stewardship of your property. So you should definitely be looking at how your building is furthering the mission of your church, including how you might consider building affordable housing on your property. Remember, your property is a tool for outreach and justice. Another is to serve as a clearinghouse to identify ways in which congregants and community members can attend and participate in social justice activities in their community. This committee should not be organizing all the events. In fact, most of them you will not be organizing or should not organize, but encouraging people to attend them and then sponsor those. Familiarizing yourself with social justice pronouncements from your denomination or judicatory. And, so like the Episcopal Church has statements on gun violence they're working on, or most of our denominations have something to say about climate justice and environmental racism. And then I guess the final thing I would say is that look at the connection between pastoral care activities of your parish with social justice. Social justice is not something you do for people out there. It usually begins with the things that people are struggling with in your own parish. People struggling to pay their utility bills. So can you help attend to that and then advocate for, policies that make that easier? Most churches have a significant percentage of their congregants who are rent burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on housing. How can you advocate for expansion of housing supply and access to affordable housing in your community? Many of you have home caregivers in your congregation or receivers of that care. What are people's working conditions? What does it cost for parishioners to get home care? Can they afford it? Do you have parishioners paying, $15,000 a month for skilled nursing that they can't afford? What can you do to alleviate that cost burden? Many congregations don't know this, but they do have current or formerly incarcerated people in their church, or a justice involved. And how do you attend to their needs and also advocate for criminal justice policy? And you might have landlords in your parish or community, encouraging them to accept housing vouchers and advocate for policies which make rental housing more affordable and prevent eviction. So if you want some help with this, you can contact us and we can help you look at your social justice committee and make some suggestions about how to strengthen that work. We can offer, as Rob said, a clean energy consultation for your congregations. And we'll talk about that in promotion of solar. And we also provide pre-development assistance to you if you want to look at repurposing your property to build affordable housing. And we have a website that explains that program. All right. Well, I threw a lot at you, but basically, we want to encourage congregations, if you're not already, to make social justice central to what you do and to give you some pointers on how to set up these committees.
Okay, so Peter and Rob, we had a question in the chat about a couple of the bills that were in front of the New York the assembly recently that did not get passed around electrification, and a question about what happened there. Peter, I think you said you might speak to that at this point, or maybe Rob would.
Yeah, well, I can take a crack at it. So, going back to this pastoral care, social justice connection here, there are a lot of buildings that are gas oriented, which can have adverse health effects on people in their homes. But this particular bill acknowledges that buildings are one of the main emitters of carbon emissions. And it would require electrification for any new construction starting as early as 2024 for new construction. Why did it? And so we joined with coalitions like Food and Water Watch, New York Renews, a lot of different groups to try to get this bill passed. It died because we had fossil fuel companies which were worried that would cut into their business model to add more gas lines. And also maybe some in the labor community who are nervous about losing jobs if they move to electrification. I think we were able to, convince them that it was going to be okay, but the fossil fuel companies really heavily oppose this. So money talks, and that's why it died.
Well, on that positive note, let's open it up for questions about this portion of the Council of Churches program, which is to say not only to do the hands-on connecting about putting solar and getting the congregations to use clean energy, but to make sure that there's advocacy as part of the congregation's response to the climate crisis as well. So yeah, who's got a question on that? John, are you raising your hand, or are you is that John Flack raising your hand? No. Jack Haggerty, do you have your hand up for a question? Maybe not. Anybody who has a question, go ahead and you can put it in the chat or raise the Zoom hand if you like. I see, Mr. Fields, go ahead.
Thank you and good afternoon. Could you send us or put in the chat those bills that failed to pass so that we could contact our local politicians and have them put it on the agenda for next year? That's the first thing. I would like to see that as a resource that we could use. Secondly, one of the major items that is not being addressed here that should be is what are we doing to conserve energy? Because I see, for example, in the MTA, every place I look, they have all these electric TV screens. We used to have a paper map, everything is electrified. And I know LEDs supposedly consume less electricity, but it's not entirely true, as I wrote in the chat, because fluorescent bulbs as well as LED use transformers. And if you ever try to unscrew a bulb, they're extremely, extremely hot. And that heat also comes from energy, and that is not counted. And I think the first steps we should do is conserve and not leave the lights on all the time just because it's cheaper.
That's something that one can profile as part of the Social Justice Committee's work to stress conservation measures, as an act of faith, and how to advocate for that in the public square. The listing of bills, I can't just throw that up on the screen right now, but we can set a follow-up about that. It was, maybe two things that did positively pass was a banning of crypto mining, which is a huge suck on energy, but it's unclear whether the governor's going to sign it, given, the interests that are pushing that hard. And there might have been a public utility bill that also passed, but it's a little unclear.
Anything you would add about the legislative session, Rob?
Well, there was one other bill, the Build Public Renewables Act, which I believe did not pass the legislature, that would have allowed the New York Power Authority to generate and sell renewable electricity particularly to municipalities. And that was, there's some nuances of that bill, I think, that made at least some folks in the solar industry uncomfortable. So that may have contributed to it, but that there are some benefits to public procurement and development of power. So we can get into the details. I don't want to go too far down since we do have another section, but I'd say that's another bill that we can include. On
Yeah.
Yeah, let me get one other quick question from Karen then.
Given the power of money, corporations, interests in getting things passed, what reason do we have to be optimistic that the goals of the CLCPA are in fact going to be achieved?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that the CCLPA did pass.
The bill, yeah, but there's no money there.
Well,
How
I
do
know,
we
but
need the
I,
money from the legislature.
well, what I'm trying to say is that moneyed interests fought that pretty hard, and the power of collective groups of people to make that happen. This can happen, and not to get too daunted, but it's a constant battle. But the CCLPA does have a scoping plan, which is rather helpful in terms of implementing these goals. And there are things like the programs we're suggesting and others which help to implement this. There is money flowing to help them meet some of those goals, but it's not enough, and we just kind of have to keep at it.
I'd love to jump in if I may,
Yeah.
and also to maybe take a quick moment on the third section of today's discussion. I know we're short on time, but that's okay. I'll keep it brief. I think it's sometimes easy to focus on what is not happening, and it's important to advocate and continue to advocate for change. But in the context of environmental policy nationally, the CLCPA is, it's path breaking. It is a huge deal. It has teeth. The social equity components are real. That's why for solar alone, we're looking at $1 billion of new investment by the state. That's supposed to be supposedly through 2030, but realistically, it's probably 3 or 4 years worth of money. And this is also why, so it is important to sometimes have both lenses, right? The lens, the glass is both half full and half empty. Another program that we are offering with the council is working with houses of worship, with your social justice committees, to help you to offer solar subscriptions to your congregants and community members. And the reason this is interesting is more than just saying, hey, save about 10% off your bill. That's fine. That's a good thing. There's only benefit. You can't lose money. But what the bigger opportunity here, right, is that it's able to, one, show these programs and policies are real and there are actual benefits that are being delivered. And there are programs we can sign up for. It'll show up on our bill every month for the next 25 years, right? And it's important to feel that direct benefit, because advocacy can feel so abstract, right? That to actually say, oh, here's this big, huge piece of legislation that passed. Well, what's actually happening? There's one thing that is. Secondly, it's an opportunity for you to engage in discussions, the kind of questions that Peter was talking about, to engage in questions about, are people having trouble paying their electric bills? Maybe it's talking about something totally different. Maybe there's concerns around healthcare in the community. And this is a chance to start a conversation with other folks in your congregation or in your community, right? So the way that we work is to say, hey, we can work with your committee, set you up with a solar farm that you can sign folks up to. We'll provide education, any technical assistance, materials. And also there's a $100 donation that we'll provide to each congregation for everybody that signs up for our project. So it's a way to raise some money, increase some benefit that way as well. So, you know, there are different opportunities to leverage this that socially, to understand how environmental policy works, to benefit your congregation, in addition to individual members and getting discounts on their bills. So we're wanting to open it up a little more behind something that's just kind of transactional that folks are signing up for, and to have it be more of a community building and fundraising opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so other questions. I'm going to run this seminar to 1:05 because we started 5 minutes late. So we have about 7 minutes for additional conversation and questions. And really, you know, anything that we've said, you know, go at it with us.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Some of the solar programs is offering also, if your roof is in bad condition, it also offered to put a new roof as well as the panel. Is that in this program that you were speaking about now?
Yeah, that is something that can be offered in by solar. So it really depends on your roof and the particular conditions, but yes, that's something that we can look into that as part of a feasibility study.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, again, you know, we're really glad to talk with you about your individual situation and, you know, take you through these 3 pieces, and really urge you to call up. You know, we'll set up an appointment and we can.
Part of what we can
walk
help you understand is both there are, building on what Peter's saying in a consultation, is what are the offerings in the market, right? So you get an offer, it's a good offer, it's a bad offer, so you get proposals from multiple vendors. So taking that perspective, you know, maybe we have our own sources as well. We're not tied to anybody though, right? So to help you understand, are you getting like good, fair deal? That's really the ultimate objective here. And heck, if you can get a new roof along with solar and get a discount on your solar, that's a great thing, right? But we want to make sure that you are both getting benefits and protected from any downside of the deal.
I just want to clarify, to work with the council and with you, Rob, to engage in this process, you need to engage a social action team. Is that correct? Like you can't just say, oh, we're going to do the solar energy part of it, but you're going to just talk to our trustees and we're going to keep it at that. We aren't really interested in the social justice component. Would you be still willing to work with a congregation under those circumstances?
Sure. You know, if the trustees want to do the solar piece of this, you know, selling subscriptions and make that an initiative, then we'll start there. You know, that's fine. Of course, when they start that, they're going to quickly discover that they're becoming a social justice committee in the process. And, you know, so often congregations kind of segment, you know, well, social justice is over here and the trustees are over here. And, you know, we're trying to say, actually, these things are so interconnected. And so, but it's up to you to figure out the place where that makes sense, you know, to start. And then we just kind of work off that energy point, you know. The other thing I would just say again is if you are wanting help evaluating your building for pre-development and building affordable housing, particularly on your site, that is also a conversation we can have with you. And we have pre-development money, particularly for congregations in New York City to do this, but we have access to funds and expertise in other parts of the state as well to help you with this.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
I'm sorry I came in late. I am very interested in this. I did solar on my church previously and also on my home. I think it's a great thing for folks to be doing. I assume, Peter, a video of this will be made available and we can share it with church members and neighboring churches to encourage folks to go for it.
Yep, it's being recorded.
Ron, did you have another question?
I was wondering, as a resource, whether you could send out some educational materials. I mean, there's some churches that are in shadows of tall buildings, especially in Manhattan, that could not generate sun, and obviously the sun farm concept would be the natural answer for that. I have had experience with solar with my son's house. I can tell you we're making tons of money off of his roof. It's very nice to have negative electric bills. And as a matter of fact, we're in a great temperate zone for as far as production. The hotter it gets, actually, the less effective solar panels are. So New York State is very well located for that. What I would like to see, is there some kind of a fact sheet? For example, the difference between having a new gas boiler and, if the church has land, putting in a heat pump, how that would do. If you need to have let's say a parish hall and you need 3 air conditioners, what would be the advantage of having a non-ducted unit, like the Mitsubishis and all that? What are the savings? Because I believe initially the costs might be more, but the electric savings are great. And it would be nice to have a fact sheet to show, before you go buy an air conditioner, before you rush to do this, consider what the savings would be if you took this alternate route.
We don't have those fact sheets yet, but we can work on those. But again, because the point's well taken. The reason we want to have people talk to us about their individual situation is so that we can tailor it to that particular place and not just give people a kind of a boilerplate. And this can vary radically from one congregation to the next, and there's a lot of factors that go into that. So what we would come out with after that consultation is a set of clear recommendations about how to move forward.
I think we just have time for one last quick question. Margaret, would you like to unmute?
Thanks. Actually, a topic that might be good for a fact sheet, because it's very general, that I've run into in different situations, is the belief that many trustees and finance committees have that fiduciary responsibility means saving the most money, earning the most money from investments, et cetera. And even if you're a church, that's their highest duty as fiduciaries. And explaining to people that if you're a religious organization, the best return on investments or spending the less money is not your highest responsibility, both legally and morally. Explaining, like Peter said, the trustees become a social justice committee, whether they want to or not. They already are, whether they want to or not. And so that's a misconception that I think would be wonderful if it could be addressed.
If I
Yeah,
could just blow the horn of the Westminster Presbyterian Church for a moment, the way we handled that, Margaret, and I think we modeled this on the work of another congregation, First Reform in Schenectady, is our session actually brought to us by our Earth Care team. Our session passed a motion saying explicitly that all decisions of the church would consider the environmental impact of that decision, and cost would not be the only factor in every decision, from investments to repairs in the building to programming for the education of the church and all of that, that we would always take into account the environmental impact of that decision.
and if I could just build on that, a lot of times trustees, in focusing on their fiduciary responsibility, aren't doing that very well because they're not looking at all of their financial options with the property. And they also need to understand that when you do justice well and it builds relationships with the community, that often can generate rental revenue. It can generate commitment to the church in terms of pledging. And if you get too myopic about this, you might save a few bucks, but in the long term, you might find that you're just not getting the same kind of financial return than if you had taken this more social justice kind of approach.
I can see we've got, Bruce has his hand up. We have a question from Ann Farrell. I know we said we were going to end at about this point. So why don't we take those two quick comments and then we'll wrap it up. Ann,
Yeah.
you want to go first, and I think you've had your hand up. Yep.
Hi. My question is, First Baptist Church in Ithaca, we also, as one of our core values, is to always consider social and ecological justice in every decision that we make, and we're very committed to that. My real question is, we've already had an energy assessment done by a local energy firm through a program by CERTA. And we have an engineer that we're working with to try to help us figure out what to do in terms of moving away from putting in a boiler to replace our aging boiler. And we're looking at heat pumps. We don't have room for geothermal. My question is, can you still work with us? Because we're really grappling with how to move forward. The engineer we're working with is very capable, but doesn't have the breadth of knowledge that it seems that, we were talking about here today, that Rob was talking about. And I just wondered if we set up an appointment with the folks at the council churches, if we could get some additional assistance to look at what our options are, even though we've done a lot of work already. Does it require having that energy assessment, Rob, or can you help us otherwise with the information we have?
No, that's actually ideal. We would love to work with you. I think it's exactly what we're set up to do. You've already been working with technical experts on a lot of the technical feasibility questions, and to help you think through what should you prioritize, how should you go about considering different technologies. It's always the question of how you're going to pay for it. That's what we want to help you with. And in fact, I think when we're talking about case studies, right, then the first couple of these will really be able to serve its model. So it sounds like an ideal situation for us to work with.
So then
let me give.
I was just going to say, then I should just get in touch with the council to set something up.
Yes.
Yep. We'll
Fabulous. That sounds great. I'm really excited about the possibility.
Yeah, it is an exciting program. Bruce, a quick comment from you, and then we'll need to wrap up.
Two quick things. I put in the chat a link to the article about the solar project we did 15 years ago in Delaware. The treasurer was a top manager for DuPont. He didn't want to do it. We got new members who joined because of the solar panels. The treasurer loved it after all those new pledges came in. He moved to the Delaware. He moved to the Delaware beach and got solar panels on his new home at the beach. So you can get new members. I would emphasize that new members, young families concerned about the environment, joining your church by doing this. We all know the church is more than a building, it's a people, and our goal is not just to work on energy within the church building, but within the community of faith. So we should challenge our members to be doing things. And the end of this month, I put in the chat, we're hosting a Cornell workshop on energy conservation, which is the easy thing to do in people's homes, because the electric bills are going up, and this is a good way to get the folks involved. And once they conserve, then we can talk to them also about sourcing that electrical work, solar and other ways.
Thank you all so much for coming. This has been a great discussion and very, very tantalizing for further conversations. Rob, Peter, any closing words as we sign off?
Well, just to build on what Bruce said, for those of you who are comfortable with the word evangelism or church growth, the 101 on this is that you build relationships in your community with people and get out of your building and start to do that. And this is one of many vehicles that you can do and engage in that, will help your church to grow by authenticating your mission out in the community, in the places that you serve.
Great. Thank you. Rob, were you about to say something there?
No, yeah, I think that's a great note to wrap up on.
Well, great. And we look forward to further conversation. Thank you all for your time. More information by contacting directly the New York State Council of Churches. That information is on their website. Peter also put his and Rob's email address and phone numbers in the chat. And with that, we will bid you adieu.
Thanks, everybody.